So now today what I'm going to do is just quickly remind you about the format in which you do diet charts for an examination purpose, and then I'll just tell you the format that you use when you're doing a diet chart in real life, like in an for an outpatient clinic. Whoever has this background, could you kindly mute? Ankita, is that you? Probably you have a very disturbing background. Uh, so first let me go into how you write in diet chart for the exam. But the examination point of view, your diet charts should be actually written, or like when you're writing it theoretically, it should be written like the first thing you write is your aim. What is the aim? For example, let's take the second question for example. A 50-year-old obese chronic alcoholic male patient with HTN was admitted 1 week back with a weakness of the right side of the body. Enumerate the dietary principles of the said patient. So the aim of this the first point of this would be aim to plan a diet chart for then you almost copy the question that for a 50-year-old chronic alcoholic patient with HTN and with the who was admitted 1 week before with the weakness of the right side. Full stop. And then you mention the following are his clinical parameters. Uh, uh, Pressure 190 by 110, lipid profile, whatever is mentioned, whatever clinical parameters you get. So let me repeat again. The aim is written in the way, the initial part of the question, plan a diet chart for a 50-year-old obese chronic alcoholic male patient with hypertension who was admitted 1 week back with the weakness of the right side of the body. Full stop. The clinical findings of the patients are, and then you mention whatever clinical findings you find in the question. The same thing, if it is for a real life patient, then where will you find the clinical findings in? You will find the clinical findings in the patient's file. Those of you who are already been doing the ward clinical rounds, you know. Those of you who haven't, I'll ensure that we take a copy. Ankita, will it be possible for us to pull out an old file and get a few pictures taken? Because those who are doing an online internship will not get the opportunity to actually see a real file. But we can always, those who are doing online internships can always come over, just inform us and come over any day you feel like, just inform us beforehand. And, for maybe a day or two or a week, now that the pandemic is more or less under control, you can come for a week and you can actually do just the ward rounds or just see the kitchen in reality, how the food is getting plated. I would suggest that you people do so unless and until you are, of course, in a situation that you still are affected by the pandemic. But I believe most of you are already in a state, at least most of us are already in a state that, we've started moving out of our houses and work has resumed in normal way. And you can be assured that KPC is also no longer having much of corona cases. Our corona cases are almost down to 9 or 10, and that too in a completely separate building. And the government has already informed us that we will no longer remain a corona hospital and we'll be going back to normal functioning. So you need not also worry about corona anymore in KPC. So any of you or all of you, I would suggest, if you could manage those who are doing a complete online internship to come to the site and do some on-site work, especially like going to the wards and stuff. That gives you a feel of what the real thing is all about. Going to the kitchen, which gives you a feel about what the real thing is all about. So if you're interested, and this will be a request from my side, do organize and let Unkita ma'am or Sweta ma'am or Shambhasha ma'am know. In fact, it'll be better, don't get Unkita ma'am, inform Sweta ma'am or Shambhasha ma'am. Then, groups can be formed for you people and you can come for a week and just see these works being done. Okay, since for this is for the people who has already covered, maybe 2 months of their internship on the online mode, or 3 months of the internship on their online mode, or people is joined in, maybe March and April, and who could not come at all to the site. So I am talking this specifically for those people. And the people who are already doing an on-site internship, well, you are there, so you know how it is. So for a real-time short patient, you will find the clinical presentations in the files of the patient. Then we come to, this is your step one of your diet chart. Now you come to the step two of your diet chart. What is step two of your diet chart? Is it is making the diet prescription. What is the diet prescription? You basically out there you calculate the protein, carbohydrate, fat, and the calories. This aside, if you want to calculate or if you want to specify on any other macro or micronutrients which you feel would be very important for your particular case, so you just simply write them down. What would be the ideal amount of carbohydrate, protein, fat, calories that you want to give the patient. So that is basically like a small box where you calculate first the carbohydrates, because that gives you the chunk of the calories. So first you decide upon the calories, and let's say you decide to give this particular patient a 1500 kilocalorie diet, maybe something on those lines. So you first decided on your kilocalories, that's 1500. Now, for this patient, since he's alcoholic and he's hypertensive and a high lipid profile, so he's prone to be maybe diabetic, though it is not mentioned, but it's mentioned that he's obese. So we don't know about his sugar profile, blood sugar profile, but I am assuming with such a scenario, more often than not, the patient will have deranged deranged glycemic control. So I would probably give around 60 to 65%, maybe 60% of the total calories from kilocalorie from carbohydrate. But this again is not an hard and fast rule. As I told you, that every diet chart is basically empirical, and how you go about it is completely your decision. You just need to adhere to the generic principles. The rest, how I calculate, how you calculate, can be quite different. Now, it so happens, as what we call in medicine, the school of thought. Since I am teaching you people, so most of you would be learning my school of thought. So it goes in that way, but which doesn't necessarily mean that somebody from a different school of thought who is probably using 65% for this patient is necessarily wrong, or somebody who is using 55% of kilocalories from carbohydrates for this patient is necessarily wrong. I would be using 60%. And since you are learning from me, maybe most of you would be using 60%. And that's how you learn. Later on, when you take it up in life, in real situation, you would probably be using a 60%. Okay. So we now have calculated the carbohydrates. Then you calculate the protein. As we all know that the RDA is now zero point 0.8 grams per kg body weight, and this patient has no other indication that should be given a higher protein than that. But we do not also want to give him a lower protein than that, because zero point 0.6 grams would mean protein restriction and would require us to supplement ketogenic amino acids. This is one thing I always say, and I'm repeating once again. Please remember, the more of protein restriction you're going into through your diet, you'll have to supplement the patient's diet with a commercial ketogenic amino acid formulation. And why ketogenic amino acids? Because the glucogenic amino acids, if you remember, if you recall your biochemistry pathways, you will remember that the glucogenic amino acids, they entered into the TCA cycle right at the point of the alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase enzyme system. So they enter the TCA cycle and then they assist in the neoglucogenesis function of the body. So since we don't want proteins to be broken down to give calories to our bodies, we want protein for their other actual functions. We usually give ketogenic amino acids whenever we are supplementing protein externally to a patient. So here I would give a zero point 0.6 gram per kg body weight. Now, like I was talking previously, that it's a school of thought. But you will have to bear one thing in mind here. If somebody wants to give 1.2 grams per kg body weight of protein, that would be incorrect, because such a patient, as I was mentioning earlier, could be a patient of this nephropathy. A very common complication of late diabetes is nephropathy, and we do not want to aggravate or accelerate the situation by giving too much of protein to the patient. So we have discussed in the diet prescription how we mentioned the calories, the carbohydrates, the proteins. Once the carbohydrate and the protein has been calculated, you then give the rest or the remaining from fat. That is how basically it is done. So because we know that the main calories come from three different sources: the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats. So first you calculate the carbohydrate, then you calculate the protein, and finally whatever calorie is left, that you divide it by 9 to find out the amount of fat you want to give to this patient. Why do we do this? Because after we make the diet chart, we have to go to a plus minus range of this, what we consider the ideal nutrient or the proximate principal requirement for the patients. So, what is the plus minus range for kilocalories? It is plus minus 50. So, you ultimately have to arrive to a, what do I say, a combination of foods which will give you plus minus 50, which will come with a, whose combination will give you a calories of plus minus 50 to your prescribed ideal calories. For protein, it is plus minus 5. For fat, it is plus minus 2.5. And we sometimes take a broad range for carbohydrate as plus minus 15 to plus minus 25, but this is a little controversial. So do not mention this in your diet plan, but this is when this plus minus 15 to plus minus 25 is ideally used when we are doing a diet chart in real life. Okay. So I'll just repeat it once again. For the calories, the range is plus minus 50. For protein, the range is plus minus 5. For fat, the range is plus minus 2.5. So we have finished step 2 of our diet chart. Now we come to step 3, the most important part of your diet chart, that is the actual diet chart calculation. So this is done in a tabular form. What is written in the rows and in the columns? I'll first talk about the columns. There are actually I make 5 columns because I do not want to keep calculating the calories at the end for every single food group. I rather add up all my protein, fats, and carbohydrates, and then I find out the calories in one go. So for me, what I do is my first column is food groups, my second column is amount, my third column is carbohydrate, then it's protein and fat. That could be in any order that you want. You can have protein, fat, carbohydrate, that's completely up to you. And you may or may not want to add kilocalories as your sixth column, but I don't do it because I simply save the time. I do not keep continuously calculating the calories for every single food group. I do it at the very end. So that goes with my columns. Now my rows. I usually what we do at KPC is we take most of the food, which you guys have already also learned, which we take most of the food groups in a general group form. For example, we take a cereal group, we take a pulpy fruit group, we take a citrus fruit group. Now, why this is done? For two reasons. First, of course, being convenience, because it is very difficult when you are doing an actual diet chart. For your exam, when you're doing it, you will have the nutritive value of Indian foods there in front of you. You can refer to it. But in real life, when you're doing it, You do not get a nutritive value of Indian foods lying beside you. You cannot have your patients, waiting for a diet chart while you painstakingly go through the nutritive value of Indian foods and you take 45 minutes to do a diet chart because uh, that's absurd. You have to complete your diet chart in real life within, say, 10 minutes or even less while you are talking to the patient, while you are taking the diet history of the patient. You have to start calculating. So maybe you've got just about 5 minutes to make your main diet prescription, and another 5 minutes when you keep writing your diet chart, and probably you keep it. That's what at least what we do, and what I have taught my staff, my people, your teachers who've been my student once. That while we write the diet chart, we keep talking about it. Like I've been giving you this and this, so we interact with the patient. That is the way we get further information out of the patient. The patient gets to know what we are giving to him or her, and if the patient has any difficulty in following that particular advice, for like it cannot be prepared by that person, or the person does not like it, or the person is allergic to it, person somehow it's not available, anything, does not want that particular food at that particular time, want it at some other time, or there are some myths that the patient has about the food which you need to clarify, which you need to tell him or her, and tell him or her that's a myth, and give the fact. While you are making the diet chart, you actually keep communicating with the patient about, like, say, I for 6 a.m. this is your tea time, and so long and so forth. So you just calculate the food groups amount. So what are the in the rows? It goes like, first is your cereal products, then is your pulses and legumes, then is your green leafy vegetables, then is your other vegetables, then comes your roots and tubers, then comes your pulpy fruit, then comes your citrus fruits, then comes your flesh product, then comes your eggs. I normally take eggs separately. Then comes your milk and milk product, then comes your nuts and oil seeds, then comes your sugar and jaggery, finally comes your oil, and then the 12th can be any nutraceuticals that you are prescribing to the patient. Now, so I'll just repeat it once again. If you want, you can quickly note it down, and if you want, you'll find the values of these general like this grouping that we have done. It's available at KPC, so anybody who wants it can come over and collect it from the department. Like, we have taken few of the commonly available or the commonly eaten foods of one particular group, and we've clubbed them together, and we've taken an average value. We've taken out an average value of them. The second reason of also that I was mentioning, that why we do it for two reasons. The second reason is, see, a diet chart is not like a medicine. It's not like you've been given crocin and you need to, or you've been given clavam, and you just have it for 7 days. You don't actually, there's no other option. If that is the particular tablet that you need to take. But for a diet chart or your food, it becomes extremely monotonous if a person is forced to take the same food, same recipe, day in and day out. So, using this kind of a grouping, we are actually giving ourselves the freedom to prescribe the patient a group instead of a specific recipe or a specific menu. It's almost similar to what we used to have earlier, the exchange list, but instead of using the exchange list, we actually use these groupings, which is a plus minus of a very negligible amount when it comes to the carbohydrate, protein, or comes to the proximate principles that each of the components of that groups give. And the patients then gets the liberty of choosing from a variety of products. It's almost like uh, making a practical use of that exchange list that used to be previously used for making diet charts. So we do not say serial exchange, we simply say serial groups, okay? But it's more or less like that old wine in a new bottle. So, this is our groups. I'll repeat them once again. Cereal and cereal products, pulses and legumes, green leafy vegetables, other vegetables, roots and tubers, pulpy fruits, citrus fruits, milk and milk products, flesh products, eggs, nuts and oil seeds, sugar and jaggery, oils, and finally we come to your nutraceuticals. Now, if you want, there can be more number of rows. For example, say you do not want to use cereal groups, you want to have separately, you want to calculate for rice, bread, and wheat. Well, that's completely your choice. You can, of course, split these further into as many number of rows as you want. You can like take every single individual ingredients that you'll be using. That is completely up to the way you want to approach that particular diet chart. Like I'll give you an example. I sometimes use the values for pulpy fruit. I use the values of bananas separately, and I use the values of other pulpy fruit separately. In that is done by me basically when I find that I need to, manipulate the values of the carbohydrates, or sometimes I need to manipulate the values of the proteins. And there, what I do is I do not use the cereal group products as a whole. I use the values of rice and I use the values of wheat, because rice gives us far less amount of protein than wheat. So maybe if it's a renal diet and there I do not use a cereal group, I would go just simply take the value of parboiled rice, because there I would be able to eliminate quite a quite a mentionable amount of second class proteins by using the value of rice and not using the values of the average values of cereal groups. So this is your step 3. And how do I calculate the calories of this? At the end of it, I add up all my proteins, I add up all the fats, I add up all the carbohydrates. The fats I multiply with 9, the proteins I multiply with 4, the carbohydrates I multiply with 4, and I add up these 3 calories and I deduce my final calorie count of this diet chart. So this is the reason why I do not have the sixth row or sixth column of calories, but it's once again up to you as to how you wish to go about. But I would always suggest that you do not have that sixth row, because it's a sheer wastage of time. I would suggest that you calculate your calories at the very end of the diet chart, which is basically the same thing. Like calculating it separately and calculating it together will not give you any difference. So now what do we do after we've completed the diet chart? We see whether our protein, fat, carbohydrates are in the range in compared to what has been suggested by us in the diet prescription, the ideal scenario which we have mentioned in the diet prescription. So we do another repeat the we do another diet prescription, and this time we name this diet prescription as the modified diet prescription, where we write like this was the ideal kilocalorie and this is what we are given, so within the plus minus range. So that is the modified actual diet prescription. Okay. Then we come to the splitting. What do we? How does the split table looks like? The split table has these following columns. It has the food groups, then it has the amounts, and then it has the meals. Let's say I want to give I want to give an early morning, then a breakfast, then a mid morning, then a lunch, then mid evening, mid afternoon, then an evening, then a mid evening, a dinner, and a supper. It depends on how many meals. Each meal is a column. So what do? We write down the food groups and we write down the amounts, and then we start distributing those amounts amongst these many number of meals. For example, say we are using cereal products which we have given 200 grams to the patient. So early morning, maybe I want to give 2 biscuits to the patient. So that is going to come around 15 grams. So for cereal products, in early morning, I write 15 grams. Then I come to breakfast. Maybe I want to use 2 chapatis for the patient. So 2 chapatis comes to around 50 grams. So I write 50 grams there. In mid morning, I want to say I want to give dab water to the patient. So there is no carbohydrate, cereal groups involved. So I put a dash. Then I come to lunch. Maybe I want to give the patient 30 grams of rice or 50 grams of rice. So I write 50 there in on the row of cereal groups. And this is how you go about for all your food groups. You have split it into the number of meals that you wish to give. And when you're splitting it, you also need to have a rough menu in your mind as to what I am suggesting to the patient and what kind of approximate principles would they be containing, and what kind of food groups will they be containing? So once you have completed with your split table, it becomes very easy to do the menu. Now the menu can be of two kinds. One, it can be a generic menu, like what? For rice, I can for lunch, say maybe I can say you have other vegetables of 50 grams, and then you explain to the patient what you mean by other vegetables, like maybe your gold family vegetables, your brinjals, and your pumpkins. These are the things that are clubbed up in your other family, other vegetables, and you mention that these are what I mean by other vegetables, and say you have 150 grams of other vegetables for your lunch, and you are supposed to make two items out of these other vegetables, and this is the amount of oil that you can use. Maybe that person can use 10 grams of oil for his two vegetables for lunch. Okay, so this gives me and the patient the liberty of making a cyclic menu so that the monotony can be avoided. On the other hand, if I am, say, planning for an hospital where the same food is going to be repeated in a cyclic form, there I mentioned, like if you see the KPC regular menus that is sent to the wards, you'll find that we have a specific instruction which we give to the kitchen. Like, for example, for Monday, let's say we have Loki and we have lady's finger, maybe. Okay, so that is the two vegetables that is prepared. The kitchen knows even a month ago that on a Monday they need to prepare bottle gourd and lady's finger as the two vegetables. That is the two ways I can use this split exchange or the split menu. Okay, in generic, you can just mention the other vegetables or the amount of the food group that you have allowed in a particular meal to the patient and give the patient the choice of the recipes. Of course, you can give that person few suggested recipes, few suggested menu. You can suggest that, you can make dalia or like put your wheat this much and you put sabzi. So you can make a stuffed chapati or you can just have sabzi roti. You can make a roti roll with these sabzis in it. You can have maybe, salad vegetables and bread with it. Depending on what you find out about the patient's likes and dislike or eating habits, which you will get to know only when you take the diet history of the patient. Once you take the diet history of the patient, you will get a fairly good idea as to what kind of food the patient is used to having and what is the normal timing that the patient takes his or her food. And if you need to make any corrections with your timing and all that, you get to know and then you get to explain that to the patient. So that has been my fourth column. Then giving a suggestive menu would be your fifth step of a diet chart, and the sixth step of the diet chart is foods to be included and foods to be avoided. Now, foods to be included more or less often is mentioned in your third and the fourth step. So you need not again re-mention it unless and until you want to specifically stress on the inclusion of one particular thing that you must have. For example, for there are certain condiments maybe which you want the patient to have. For example, you want the patient to have lots of fenugreek, so you mention it there that make sure that you're always including fenugreek into your meals, or make sure that you have to maybe include lime to your meal to increase the vitamin C content, or maybe make sure you have to include double toned milk or maybe toned milk. So you mentioned that and included toned milk. What is very important is the foods to be avoided. Every diet chart will specifically have certain foods which is needed to be avoided. And here, please make sure that now that you've come to almost to the penultimate stage of your master's program, do not please copy off the net or make, illegible claims like no alcohol for an 87-year-old Bengali woman who has probably not even touched or not even seen alcohol in her life. So in her diet chart, just because you've copied off the net and the net says that there no beer, no alcohol, no tobacco, you just mindlessly put that down and you write no alcohol, no beer, no tobacco. You would have to understand that whether the patient actually takes that. The foods to be avoided should be very much patient specific. There is nothing generic. There are generic things, but you'll have to first figure out whether your patient actually falls into that generic criteria, and then only please mention those. Do not make such, uh, preposterous suggestions as like, don't take tobacco. I mean, not everybody takes tobacco, right? Or like, for example, you are writing the diet, you're preparing a diet chart for a Jain community patient who does not take non-vegetarian, so foods not to be taken, you said avoid red meat. The person avoids all kind of non-vegetarian food. Need not talk about it. That makes it appear very stupid. So this is how you present your diet charts. And when you present your case studies, please remember, you do not need to teach anybody about that particular disease in general. Whoever is seeing your presentation, be it a teacher, be it your fellow colleague, everybody knows about, or it's expected that everybody will be knowing about the disease as a whole in general. Everybody would be knowing what cirrhosis is. When you are presenting a case study, you are talking about the presentations or the clinical features that your patient is having. You are not talking about the general clinical presentation of cirrhosis. It might be that your patient has cirrhosis but does not have ascites. So you please do not take down from the net a general picture of a liver and then you write some nonsense about cirrhosis, copy it from there. No, you do not do that. That is the most obvious way to lose marks. That is not how you do a case study presentation. And a case study presentation, you talk about your patient, whom you do not, of course, name, you write XX, and whatever clinical findings your patient has been showing. But the most that you can do is you can take out like what are the general findings that you're supposed to find in cirrhosis, and then you can double tick, or you can, if the patient has it, a plus means patient has that symptom in a mild form. 2 plus means the patient is moderately showing those symptoms. 3 plus means the patient shows severe signs of that symptom, and writing NAD beside the symptom shows that the patient does not show those symptoms. So yes, you can make this kind of a table, like what are the clinical signs and what are the clinical symptoms. So whether your patient has those clinical signs, if yes, then you put a plus, a 2 plus, or a 3 plus, depending on the severity, or you put the NAD. That means the patient does not have it. You can do it in this way, but not, you need not teach anybody what liver cirrhosis is all about. Then when you're doing your case study presentation, you are supposed to mention, you're not supposed to, you have to mention the various drugs that the patient has been prescribed. Why so? Because we know that there is huge drug nutrient interaction in many cases. There are many drugs which requires the restriction of certain nutrients, many drugs which can be better functional if a particular nutrient is given, and so long and so forth. But please remember, don't put in the brand name. There can be thousands of brand name for a particular generic composition. For example, say uh, ranitidine is an H1 blocker. Okay, so ranitidine is an H1 blocker that is sold under the name of Rantac, Zintac, and so many things. So please don't write Rantax and Zintac. Please write ranitidine. And if you can, then what is the pharmacological function of it? Ranitidine, it's an H1 blocker. Okay, or maybe you write esomeprazole, which is a proton pump inhibitor. Or maybe you like what? Uh, Loperamide, which is an anti-peristaltic drug. Okay, so or maybe you write something, maybe something which is an SSRI. Maybe you want to write topiramate, and that is an SSRI. So please mention. Do not mention Topol. Topol is a brand name for topiramate. Don't mention Topol. You probably find Topol written in the medical card, but you need to find out what Topol is. It's topiramate. Then topiramate, and then please find out what category of drug is that. Is it an SSRI? Is it an H2 blocker? It is an NSAID. Whatever that is, please mention, because it can so be possible that whoever is seeing your presentation might not be acquainted to that particular drug and needs to know what is the function. So you just mention the generic name of the drug, and then you mention the category of drugs that it falls into, and then you have to mention the dosage that has been prescribed. Maybe it's been given OD, that is once daily, or it's been given BD twice daily, or TDS thrice daily, or QDS 4 times a day, and maybe there is some specification after meal, before meal, any specifications that you find about it. Okay, so this is, and then when your case study, you go in, you give your step two, as it was mentioned here in the while I was mentioning the preparation of diet charts. Then you would go into your step three, step two, step three, step four, step five. This is how you do, and often we ask you also to give a discharge diet chart at the end when you are going for a clinical case study presentation. So you do that as well. Am I clear till now? I've been speaking over an hour, and am I clear till now about whatever I've been talking about? Anybody has any queries? Do I take that? Do I take the silence as everybody has understood so far? Okay. Now, when another thing is, when you're giving a case study presentation, remember that you have mostly you'll have to stick to whatever food is available in the hospital. Like, so for example, so what you need to do is you need to take the cyclic menu of KPC Medical College. You also need to take out the serving sizes. Like, for example, say you find out in the cyclic menu that, as I was saying, on Monday, say you have Loki and lady's finger. But there are serving sizes of it. The serving size is not mentioned in the cyclic menu. There's a separate table for it where we know what is the serving sizes. So you take out that table, ask for that table, and you find out that what is the serving size, or what is the amount of grams of Loki that is given, or the amount of lady's finger that is given, and that is basically standard. It's in a cyclic minute, that's a standard, the same amount, the same cooking method. It is a standardized recipe. It's called standardization of recipes. All recipes have been standardized in not only KPC, in every hospital that serves food. They have to standardize their recipe. In any food establishment actually that serves food, their recipes are standardized, so that it's not like if you go and order a KFC popcorn bucket today, and you go and order a KFC popcorn bucket 3 days later, should not be any change of taste, any change in the uh, more or less in the weight of the food that has been given to you. Everything should be similar, isn't it? So that is called, that happens because all recipes are standardized. So the same thing is applicable for KPC dietetics, or any other dietetics department, or any food establishment which provides you with food. So you then find out from that, and then you have to more or less plan your diet chart on the basis of the cyclic menu. But please remember, which does not mean that you cannot suggest anything different from that menu. You cannot include something or exclude something if you want to. Yes, you can do that, but you will have to here bear in mind a practical consideration. You cannot suggest something which would be far too expensive or far too complicated to prepare for a patient. And secondly, if you are suggesting something for the patient which is aside the cyclic menu, that has to be pre-informed to the kitchen. In reality, of course, you are not what you're prescribing is not going to the patient. It is basically what the department is prescribing, and you are treating it as an exercise. But if you are mentioning a food which is outside of that of the cyclic menu, it should be mentioned in a bracket that this is outside the cyclic menu, and the kitchen has been pre-informed about it. Okay. Basically, certain foods need to be informed the day before if it is something which is not usually available in the kitchen and needs to be procured and be kept ready. Certain things could be told, 1 hour ago. I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to give the patient khichdi or porridge or stewed apple. Now the kitchen has porridge materials, kitchen has materials for khichdi, kitchen has apples available in the kitchen every day. Only these menus are not there in our regular cyclic menu. So I can just, if I want to give them to the patient, I need to give the kitchen maybe a preparation time of say 1 hour. So I give them a 1 hour notice. The least early I can tell the kitchen about this is at least an hour ago. Preferably, if I tell the kitchen in the first, in the other half, like if I want it for dinner, if I could say it during the lunchtime, or if I want it for lunch, if I could have mentioned it by the breakfast time, it is more convenient for the patient. But now, for example, say you want something which the kitchen, which is not as regularly available in the kitchen. Say, for example, you would want to give muskmelon to the patient for some reason. Now, the kitchen does not normally go and buy muskmelon, though it's a very cheap fruit, but the kitchen doesn't buy it because it's not there in our menu. So you want to give muskmelon to the patient, so you better inform the kitchen the day before that I want to give muskmelon, or when you've gone for the rounds, you do not go and commit to the patient that okay, আপনার একটু পরে খরমুজ আসবে. No, you don't do that because it might not be available. So you say that আজকেটা you please have today whatever has been given to you. Tomorrow I'll try and organize that. Okay, so these are the practical aspects that you must bear in mind when you're actually going to the ward, and these are the practical aspects which should come out in your case study presentation. Am I completely clear so far?